You've found Dreamtime Science, part classroom, part lullaby, entirely devoted to satisfying your curiosity while you find your way to sleep. You know what's fascinating? I've been thinking about those invisible rhythms our brains create, brainwaves, and how they quietly shape everything we feel and think. There's something remarkable about the idea that in some ways we might actually learn to guide these waves ourselves, like tuning an instrument inside our heads. I can't wait to share some gentle discoveries about how this happens and what it means for our minds. Your support through likes and subscriptions keeps this tranquil laboratory of knowledge glowing softly. Tell me in the comments what scientific concept has always fascinated you. Now take a moment, adjust your blanket, find the perfect hollow in your pillow, let your shoulders melt, breathe in and out. In the hush of the evening, as starlight begins its patient journey through your window and the world softens beneath the gentle weight of night, the stage is set for a most extraordinary performance. A symphony not of strings or woodwinds, but of electric whispers playing within the cathedral of your skull. The mind, that ceaseless conjurer of thoughts and dreams, is itself a kind of orchestra, and its instruments are not so much flesh and bone as they are patterns of energy, delicate, fleeting, and yet profoundly real. This is the story of brainwaves, the silent music that underlies every thought, every memory, every flicker of consciousness you have ever known. Let us begin not with the clinical formality of a laboratory, but in the shadowy glow of imagination, where science and myth have always mingled. For centuries, human beings sensed that the brain was more than mere matter, that it hummed with a secret vitality. Shamans and poets spoke of inner lights, of auras, of soul currents, of energies invisible yet palpable. They watched the way people changed in trance, in sleep, in madness, and guessed at hidden flows beneath the surface. It wasn't until the end of the 19th century, however, that these whispers would begin to take shape as measurable phenomena. The year was 1924, and Hans Berger, a German psychiatrist, sat hunched over a machine of his own devising. He was a man haunted by the inexplicable, by stories of telepathy and mental connection, by the mystery of his own survival in a near-fatal accident, which his sister claimed to have sensed from afar. Berger's obsession led him to seek the physical traces of thought itself. Using delicate electrodes and a string galvanometer, he captured the first electrical oscillations from a living human brain. What he saw astonished him. Rhythmic, wave-like patterns rising and falling in stately procession. He called them electroencephalogram, what we now know as the EEG, or electroencephalogram. These waves were not the erratic chaos one might expect from a mind in perpetual motion, but had form and frequency, a kind of order. Berger had opened a new window into the mind, and through it a landscape of oscillations and rhythms emerged, like watching the tides and eddies of a hidden sea. To understand brainwaves is to appreciate the paradox of the brain, its unity and its multiplicity. Each neuron is a solitary cell, a tiny living thing that receives, processes, and transmits signals. But when millions of them fire in synchrony, their electrical fields combine, giving rise to gentle undulations that can be detected even through the thick bones of the skull. These are the brain's waves, measured in hertz or cycles per second, and each type is associated with a different state of mind. In the quiet moments before sleep, your brain is likely to be bathing in alpha waves, gentle, rolling oscillations at about 8 to 13 hertz, most prominent when the eyes are closed and the body is at rest, yet not quite asleep. They are the hallmark of relaxed wakefulness, the rhythm of the daydreamer, the meditative, the quietly receptive. When you let your thoughts wander, when you stare at the clouds or listen to rain, it is alpha that lulls your mind into a tranquil openness. But the moment you turn your attention to a problem, or snap to alertness, alpha fades and is replaced by the brisk, rapid-fire chatter of beta waves, oscillations in the range of 13 to 30 Hz. Beta is the rhythm of the analytical mind, busy, focused, and outward-facing. It is the mental tempo of conversation, of calculation, of the small, sharp decisions that fill a day. In moments of anxiety or stress, beta can become uncomfortably dominant, the mind racing, the body tensed for action. Beneath these, slower still, are theta waves, oscillations from 4 to 8 Hz. Theta is the province of the half-awake and the half-asleep, the drowsy twilight of consciousness, where memories surface and strange associations are made. Children spend more time in theta than adults, and in adults, theta appears during deep meditation, hypnosis, or the first stages of sleep. It is a creative, dreamy, and sometimes uncanny realm where the boundaries of self grow thin. And deeper yet, in the slowest reaches, lie delta waves, massive rolling oscillations at less than 4 Hz. These are the waves of dreamless sleep, of the profoundest rest, when consciousness is suspended and the body repairs itself. In this state, the mind is quiet, a sleeping giant, gathering strength for the next ascent into waking life. There are other rhythms too, subtler and more elusive, the swift gamma waves, above 30 Hz, associated with moments of insight, binding together disparate perceptions, the elusive mu and lambda, each playing their part. But the great symphony of the mind is played mostly on the themes of delta, theta, alpha, and beta, their harmonies and transitions shaping the landscapes of our inner worlds. If you close your eyes now and listen, not to the world outside, but to the world within, you might sense these patterns, not as sounds, but as changes in the quality of your awareness. Recall a moment when you were lost in reverie, or when inspiration struck like lightning, or when your mind, exhausted, slipped into the soft oblivion of sleep. In each of these, a different wave held sway, a different melody threaded through the neuronal choir. What is it then to be conscious, to be awake or asleep, to dream or to ponder, if not to ride these invisible waves? The shifting patterns of the EEG are maps of our mental weather, as changeable and as revealing as the clouds that drift across the sky. As scientific understanding deepened through the 20th century, brain waves entered the wider imagination, crossing the boundary from laboratory to popular culture. The notion that our thoughts, moods, and even our personalities could be read or influenced by tuning into these rhythms proved irresistible to writers, filmmakers, and mystics alike. In the flickering glow of mid-century science fiction, brainwaves became the currency of telepathy and mind control, of psychic espionage and futuristic healing. The silver screens and pulp magazines of the 1950s and 1960s were awash with stories of machines that could record dreams, project thoughts across the ether, or reveal the innermost secrets of the mind. The EEG, with its mysterious tracings, became a symbol of the frontier between known and unknown, between the organic and the technological. One can picture the laboratory scenes. A subject reclines beneath a crown of electrodes, dials spinning, lights blinking in time with the hidden symphony. A scientist, always in a white coat, peers at the undulating lines on a chart, declaring he's dreaming now, or her mind is being influenced by an outside force. The drama lies not just in the science, but in what it promises, a window into the soul, a key to the mysteries of consciousness. Even as these images veered into fantasy, they were rooted in a tantalizing truth, that the rhythms of the brain are real, and that understanding them might one day allow us to see and perhaps change the workings of the mind itself. Modern culture, too, is suffused with echoes of this idea. The language of brainwaves has entered our everyday speech. We speak of getting on the same wavelength, of alpha states and theta healing, of brainwave entrainment and neurofeedback. Wellness movements offer devices that claim to synchronize your brainwaves for better sleep or deeper meditation. Musicians experiment with binaural beats, subtle differences in tone played to each ear, said to coax the brain into particular states. The science may be complex, the claims sometimes extravagant, but the fascination persists: to touch, to guide, to understand the silent music inside our heads. And yet, for all the popular enthusiasm, the reality remains more subtle and perhaps more wondrous than most fiction. The brain is not a simple radio to be tuned at will, nor are its waves signals to be broadcast or received by the casual observer. They are the emergent patterns of billions of cells, each alive, each communicating with its neighbors, their collective rhythms rising and falling in response to the shifting needs of the organism. They do not transmit thoughts in the sense of a radio drama, but reflect the harmony or discord of a mind at work. Still, the analogy to music is a rich one. Just as a symphony can evoke moods from elation to despair, so too do the brain's rhythms shape the contours of experience. There are moments, rare but unforgettable, when the mind seems to find a perfect resonance, when ideas flow effortlessly and the world appears in crystalline detail. Perhaps in such moments the brain's waves are unusually synchronized, the orchestra playing as one, each section supporting the others in a grand, unspoken unity. Conversely, when the mind is fragmented by anxiety, by illness, by sleeplessness, the rhythms may become discordant, the harmony lost. In epilepsy, for instance, sudden surges of synchronous firing can overwhelm normal function, producing seizures that sweep through the brain like a storm. In disorders of consciousness, the usual interplay of waves may be disrupted, leaving the person trapped in twilight states. Here, science and medicine meet, seeking to restore the balance, to retune the instruments of the mind. Throughout all this, the metaphor of waves remains apt, for waves are both local and global, both particle and pattern, both cause and effect. The brain's oscillations are shaped by its architecture, from the branching trees of neurons to the looping circuits that connect distant regions. At the same time, the waves themselves influence how information flows, how memories are formed, how attention moves from one thing to another. They are both the music and the dance. Consider the vastness of the brain's concert hall, 100 billion neurons, each with thousands of connections, flickering with the fire of sodium and potassium, calcium and chloride. The electrical fields they generate are vanishingly small, microvolts, a millionth of a volt, but when synchronized, their effects can be measured on the scalp. The EEG, that delicate instrument, is the stethoscope pressed to the heart of thought, the microphone held up to the choir of the self. In the end, the symphony of the mind is both a physical process and a metaphor for something larger. It is the pattern that emerges from chaos, the order that arises from the interplay of countless parts. It is the signature of life itself, a ceaseless, restless energy, cycling through states of wakefulness and sleep, attention and reverie, reason and imagination. As you drift tonight towards sleep, with the gentle susurrus of your own brain's waves lapping at the edges of awareness, you are participating in an ancient, ongoing performance. For all the advances of science, for all the diagrams and equations and scans, there remains an element of mystery, a sense of awe at the sheer complexity and beauty of the living mind. And so, as the night deepens and the world outside grows quiet, the symphony continues, weaving its patterns beneath the surface. In the darkness, your brain hums with silent music, shaping dreams, memories, and the slow unfolding of consciousness itself, each wave a note in the endless song of being. In the next gentle unfolding of this story, we will follow these waves deeper into the machinery of perception and the subtle play of neural circuits, where the rhythms of the mind give rise to the shifting tapestry of thought and sensation. But for now, let the music play on, and let yourself drift in the currents of the silent symphony within. When we turn our minds inward to contemplate the electrical symphony within the human brain, we find ourselves peering into an ocean that is at once familiar and unfathomable. The brain, with its unyielding intricacies, is a realm of ceaseless rhythm, a place where patterns of energy ebb and flow, breaking upon the shores of consciousness and receding into the silent depths of sleep. To speak of brain waves is to speak of the tides and currents of this cerebral sea, those countless oscillations that ripple invisibly through the tissue of thought and perception. Let us drift for a while beneath the surface into the limitless depths of these cerebral seas. In the cool hush of a darkened laboratory, an electroencephalogram traces its delicate script upon a length of paper, rendering in ink the hidden dances of neurons. Wavy lines rise and fall, a cryptic calligraphy in which we have learned to discern 5 principal forms: delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, each named for a letter of the Greek alphabet, each corresponding to a particular frequency, a certain tempo in the brain's perpetual music. These waves are more than simple measure. They are the fleeting signatures of mental state and function, the rise and fall of thought itself. But what are these waves, truly? They are not waves in the sense of water or air. They are not like the undulating motion of the sea, nor the trembling of a plucked string. Instead, these are electrical oscillations, the aggregate result of millions of neurons communicating with one another in intricate synchrony. Each neuron, a tiny living wire, is capable of generating an action potential, a brief pulse of voltage, a spark that leaps from cell to cell via the synapses, those slender bridges of biochemistry. When vast assemblies of neurons fire together in rhythm, their combined electrical fields can be detected at the scalp, forming the composite waves that we measure as brain activity. The genesis of these brain waves is rooted in the exquisite architecture of the cortex, that thin rind of grey matter folded into the convolutions of our skulls. Here, pyramidal neurons align in parallel, their dendrites rising toward the pile surface like the trunks of a spectral forest. When they fire in synchrony, the tiny currents generated by each cell add together, creating a stronger signal, the very essence of the waves we observe. Yet beneath this apparent simplicity lies a labyrinth of complexity, for the timing and synchrony of neurons are shaped by 1,000 hidden influences, the chemistry of neurotransmitters, the feedback from distant brain regions, the whispering influence of inhibitory interneurons, and the subtle modulation of glial cells. To gaze upon an EEG is to look at a map of a landscape whose mountains and valleys shift with every blink, every sigh, every passing thought. The slow, rolling delta waves of deep sleep tumble across the cortex like distant thunder, while the nimble beta and gamma oscillations flicker with the quicksilver intensity of focused attention or sudden insight. Alpha rhythms, gentle and regular, wax and wane with the closing of our eyes, marking the transition from waking alertness to the liminal calm of relaxation. Theta waves, those mysterious heralds of memory and reverie, drift between the boundaries of wakefulness and dream. For all our knowledge, the purpose and full significance of these waves elude us, receding like the horizon as we approach. Why does the brain organize itself in this oscillatory manner? What benefit lies in these synchronous dances? Theories abound, each shimmering with promise and uncertainty. Some neuroscientists suspect that brain waves serve to coordinate activity between distant regions, binding together disparate perceptions into a unified experience. Others see them as mechanisms for separating or prioritizing streams of information, like traffic signals at the intersections of the mind. Still others propose that oscillations act as internal clocks, pacing the flow of neural activity, ensuring that signals arrive in the proper sequence. Yet even as we seek to understand, our instruments impose their own limitations. The scalp-based EEG, for all its elegance, is but a stethoscope pressed to the hull of a ship, catching only the loudest and most synchronized of the brain's internal phenomena. It is exquisitely sensitive to surface activity, to the broad swells of coordinated firing in the upper cortex, but it is all but deaf to the deeper eddies and hidden currents of subcortical structures. The hippocampus, the thalamus, the basal ganglia, these ancient regions, so vital to memory, emotion, and movement, are largely veiled from our non-invasive gaze. The resolution of EEG is further blurred by the skull and scalp themselves, which diffuse and smear the electrical signals, rendering them fuzzy and indistinct. A single electrode records the sum of many thousands of underlying neurons, their individual voices lost in the chorus. And so, while we can identify the broad rhythms of sleep and waking, and even detect the sharp spikes of seizures or the subtle shifts of attention, the fine-grained patterns of thought remain largely inscrutable. To probe deeper, some researchers have turned to invasive techniques, implanting electrodes directly into the brain. In neurosurgical patients, tiny wires can be threaded into the hippocampus or cortex, capturing the raw electrical language of individual neurons and their microcircuits. Here, the beauty and chaos of neural communication is revealed in exquisite detail, bursts of gamma oscillations as a memory is retrieved, ripples of theta during the navigation of imagined spaces. Yet such glimpses are rare and fleeting, confined to the operating room and the hospital bed, limited by the ethical boundaries that protect the sanctity of the living brain. Other limitations arise from the sheer richness and variability of brain activity. No 2 moments of consciousness are ever quite the same. The pattern of waves changes not only with our actions and intentions, but with our moods, our memories, our hopes and fears. The same brain may produce different rhythms in response to the same stimulus, depending on fatigue, age, or disease. Even the act of paying attention to one's own mental state can shift the oscillations, like the observer disturbing the quantum system under study. We are further confounded by the immense diversity among individuals. Each brain, shaped by a unique history, a singular unfolding of genes and experience, sings its own peculiar song. The alpha rhythm in one person may be slow and languid, in another brisk and insistent. The boundaries between wave types blur, overlapping in both space and frequency, defying the tidy categories we have imposed. The very act of classification, of dividing the spectrum into delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, is a convenience, a map drawn upon a shifting sea, useful for navigation, but always incomplete. As we move deeper into these cerebral waters, we encounter even more subtle phenomena, the so-called microstates of EEG, fleeting patterns that last only hundreds of milliseconds, yet seem to correspond to distinct modes of thought. Like the eddies and whirlpools in a vast ocean, these microstates suggest that the brain is not merely a place of continuous flow, but one of sudden transitions, a patchwork of fleeting islands in the stream of consciousness. Scientists pore over these patterns, seeking clues to the fundamental units of mental life, yet their meanings remain tantalizingly obscure. Still more enigmatic are the questions that arise when we consider the relationship between brainwaves and subjective experience. What is the connection between the oscillations we record and the thoughts, feelings, and sensations that define our inner worlds? Can a certain pattern of waves be said to cause a particular perception, or are both merely the outward signs of deeper processes, as the weather is the visible face of atmospheric dynamics? The philosopher's dilemma haunts the neuroscientist's quest. To what extent can the objective patterns of the EEG be mapped onto the subjective tapestry of awareness? There are times when the waves themselves seem to rebel against our understanding, as in the paradoxes of sleep. In the depths of non-REM slumber, the cortex is flooded by slow, high-amplitude delta waves, and consciousness dissolves into a formless void. Yet, in REM sleep, the stage of vivid dreaming, the EEG resembles wakefulness, with fast, low-amplitude activity and bursts of sawtooth waves. Here, the brain is both asleep and awake, anchored in the body, yet roaming through landscapes of the imagination. The same oscillations that mark attentive thought in the day can be found lighting the mind stage in the night, their meanings transformed by context and state. Our attempts to manipulate brainwaves have met with limited success. Techniques such as neurofeedback, transcranial electrical stimulation, and rhythmic sensory entrainment promise to alter oscillatory activity, to enhance learning, relieve depression, or induce relaxation. Yet the effects are often subtle, variable, and poorly understood. The brain is not a passive receiver, but an active, adaptive system, quick to compensate for external perturbation. When we seek to impose rhythm from without, the internal symphony resists, bends, or transforms, yielding results as unpredictable as the weather. The study of brain waves is further complicated by the nature of our analytical tools. The mathematics of oscillations is deep and subtle, requiring the decomposition of complex signals into their constituent frequencies, a task akin to teasing apart the harmonics of a symphony recorded from afar. Techniques such as Fourier analysis, wavelet transforms, and independent component analysis allow us to glimpse the underlying structure, but always at the cost of simplification. The brain's rhythms are not static, but modulate in both time and space, interweaving in ways that challenge even the most sophisticated algorithms. Consider, too, the influence of the body upon the brain's rhythms. Heartbeat, respiration, the pulse of blood through the vessels, all leave their subtle marks upon the EEG, confounding the interpretation of signals. Even the act of blinking can send ripples through the recorded waves, a reminder that the brain is never truly isolated, but part of a living, breathing whole. And so, as we chart the seas of the brain, we are ever aware of the limits of our maps and instruments. The waves we record are both revelation and riddle. They tell us that the brain is a place of order and pattern, yet also of chaos and unpredictability. For every insight gained, a dozen new questions arise. What hidden rhythms remain undiscovered, masked by the limitations of our tools? What secrets are held in the silent depths, where oscillations of the hippocampus and thalamus pulse unseen? Yet it is precisely these limitations that lend the study of brainwaves its peculiar allure. The sense of peering into the unknown, of glimpsing the outlines of a vast and intricate machinery whose workings are only partly revealed, fills the mind with wonder. We recognize that the brain's rhythms are not mere epiphenomena, but the very scaffolding of thought, memory, and consciousness. They are the tides of being, the oscillations upon which our lives are built. As we prepare to venture further, to trace the pathways by which these waves shape our waking and dreaming lives, we must carry with us a sense of humility. The brain is not a clockwork, but a living ocean, a place of endless movement, unpredictable and profound. Each oscillation, each fleeting pattern, is a clue to the mysteries that lie beneath, waiting to be uncovered by those with patience and imagination. Beyond the horizon of our current understanding, new methods beckon: magnetoencephalography, optogenetics, computational modeling, each promising to reveal new facets of the brain's secret rhythms. But even as our tools grow more powerful, the essential mystery remains. The brain, that restless sea, continues to sing its silent songs, inviting us always to listen more deeply, to surrender to the currents, and to let ourselves be carried, wave by wave, into the unexplored depths. And somewhere in the unseen darkness the next discovery waits, as silent and inevitable as the turning of the tides. Before us stretches a landscape vast and mysterious, its boundaries not of mountains or seas, but of the mind's own electric wilderness. In the velvety darkness behind our foreheads, patterns of energy shimmer and flow. For untold millennia, these inner auroras, brainwaves, whispered their stories in secret, invisible to the eye, inaudible to the ear. Humanity wandered within itself, suspecting these hidden rhythms, perhaps, but lacking the lanterns to reveal their form. But curiosity, that most ancient of lights, is a restless companion. Across centuries, thinkers and tinkerers pondered the possibility of peering into the mind's electric garden. What if the thoughts, dreams, and memories swirling within us left traces, ripples, however slight, that could be detected and mapped? What if the mind's silent music could be heard? The journey toward charting the unseen began in the late 19th century, amid the first flickers of electrical science. The world was learning, with awe and trepidation, that living tissue not only responded to electricity, but generated it. Luigi Galvani, with his frog legs twitching under metal probes, and Alessandro Volta, coaxing sparks from chemical stacks, had already shown that life and lightning were, in some sense, kindred, but the human brain, with its soft, veiled complexity, remained unyielding. Could its activity, so subtle and diffuse, ever be recorded? In 1924, Hans Berger, a German psychiatrist, performed an experiment alone in his laboratory, a moment now woven into the tapestry of scientific legend. Berger had long been haunted by the question of whether the brain's activity, its flowing thoughts and shifting moods, might spill outward into the world as electrical signals. He believed, perhaps eccentrically, that the mind's workings, those private tides, could be made visible. With a sensitive galvanometer and silver wires pressed gently against the scalp of his son, Berger detected faint, rhythmic fluctuations. Each curve and dip, a trace, a shadow, was a ghostly echo of the brain's inner electrical dance. He called these signals the electroencephalogram, or EEG. The name comes from the Greek, electro for electricity, encephalo for brain, gram for writing. It was, in essence, the brain's script written in flickering voltage, a continuous record of what the neurons beneath were murmuring to one another. Berger's first EEGs were humble, almost primitive by modern standards. The signals were minute, measured in microvolts, and the equipment was exquisitely sensitive to interference. The wires, silver-plated and pressed to the scalp with conductive paste, captured not only the brain's waves, but the world's static, the hum of streetcars, the tremor of footsteps, even the beating of the experimenter's own heart. Yet the patterns persisted. When his subject closed their eyes, a gentle undulation, a wave at around 10 cycles per second, rose from the background. Berger called it the alpha rhythm, a slow rolling tide that seemed to signal a restful, wakeful mind. The EEG had cracked open the door between matter and mind. For the first time, the human brain's activity could be watched in real time, its fluctuations traced on long scrolling sheets of photographic paper. The world's neuroscientists, at first skeptical, came to marvel at the variety of waves they saw. The fast, low-voltage beta waves of concentration and alertness, the slower theta waves of drowsiness and childhood, the deep, stately delta waves of sleep. The EEG became not just a tool of discovery, but a window into the altered landscapes of consciousness. Sleep, once a nightly vanishing act, was revealed as a procession of rhythmic shifts, cycles of light and deep, dreamless and dreaming. Epilepsy, long shrouded in stigma and confusion, now displayed its storms in jagged spikes and sudden surges. Even the approach of death could be traced, as the brain's once vital lines faded to silence, a flat expanse across the paper. Yet for all its wonder, the EEG was a blunt instrument. Its signals, gathered from the scalp, were like echoes heard through a thick wall, faithful but blurred and jumbled. The brain's electrical storms passed through bone and skin, their patterns smudged by the journey. The EEG painted in broad strokes, capturing the symphony but missing the soloists, the individual players in the orchestra of the mind. As the 20th century unfurled, scientists dreamed of sharper eyes and finer brushes. They reached for new ways to map and measure, to capture the brain's electric whispers with greater clarity. One advance came with the refinement of electrode arrays. Early EEGs used just a handful of contacts scattered across the scalp. But as technology improved, researchers developed caps bristling with dozens, even hundreds of electrodes. Each electrode became a listening post, picking up the faint local murmurs of neurons below. With clever mathematics, source localization, and inverse modeling, scientists could begin to estimate not just if something was happening, but where, deep within the brain's folds. Still, the EEG could not peer with precision into the tangled forests of the cortex. Its view was always softened by distance. The need for finer maps led some researchers to venture inside, placing electrodes directly on the surface of the brain, or even threading them into its depths. This technique, called electrocorticography, EKG, is sometimes used in surgical planning for epilepsy. Here, with the skull opened and the living brain exposed, the waves appear in sharper relief, each local surge and ripple mapped with exquisite detail. Yet such invasiveness is only possible in rare circumstances, under the most careful of hands. For most, the quest for less intrusive, more detailed views continued. The search for new tools led to the blossoming of neuroimaging, a family of techniques less concerned with the brain's flickering voltages, and more with its inner chemistry and blood flow. If the EEG was a seismograph for the mind's electricity, these new methods became cartographers of its shifting landscapes. One of the earliest was positron emission tomography, or PET, which emerged in the 1970s. In PET, a trace amount of radioactive glucose, essentially sugar marked with a positron-emitting atom, is introduced into the bloodstream. As neurons work and fire, they consume this fuel. Special detectors ring the head, capturing the faint signals given off as the radioactive glucose decays. The result is a ghostly image, regions of the brain glowing more brightly where activity burns hottest. PET scans were revolutionary. For the first time, scientists could watch the living brain at work, lighting up as a person read a sentence, solved a puzzle, or recalled a childhood memory. The process was slow, each image took minutes to acquire, and the resolution was coarse. But it revealed a fundamental truth, that the mind is rooted in matter, and that thought leaves a map behind, like footprints in snow. Soon after came magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, a technique that uses powerful magnets and pulses of radio waves to map the water molecules within our tissues. By tuning the machinery to capture not just structure, but also subtle changes in blood oxygenation, scientists devised functional MRI, or fMRI. This tool could watch, almost in real time, as different brain regions pulsed with activity. The images, rendered in false color, resembled blooming flowers, the visual cortex brightening as we gaze at a painting, the motor cortex lighting up as we imagine the movement of our hands. fMRI brought a new era of brain mapping. With it, researchers could ask, where does language live in the mind? What pieces ignite when we dream, remember, or empathize? The answers, always partial and shifting, began to sketch out the brain's great cities and their winding roads. Yet fMRI, too, has its limitations. It does not see the brain's electrical storms directly. Instead, it watches the blood tides that follow in their wake. The signals are delayed, blurred over seconds, and averaged across millions of neurons. The dance of brainwaves, those fleeting ripples and surges, remains hidden, seen only in outline. To bridge this gap, some scientists turn to magnetoencephalography, or MEG. This technique, born of the marriage between physics and neuroscience, detects the tiny magnetic fields produced by the brain's electrical currents. The fields are unimaginably faint, billions of times weaker than Earth's magnetic pull. Yet with superconducting sensors chilled to near absolute zero, MEG can pick up their whispers. The result is a map of brain activity that combines the EEG's dazzling speed with a sharper sense of place. MEG's machines are wonders in themselves, helmet-like arrays, bristling with sensors surrounding the head in a magnetic cocoon. When a subject listens to music, solves a riddle, or slips into sleep, the magnetic ripples of their neurons can be traced in real time, millisecond by millisecond, across the landscape of the cortex. The patterns can be analyzed, their sources triangulated, their rhythms compared and decoded. The interplay of these methods, EEG, ECOG, PET, fMRI, MEG, has given rise to a new kind of brain science, one in which the mind's hidden realms are charted with increasing precision. Each tool has its strengths and its shadows. The EEG listens with speed but little depth. The fMRI sees with clarity but lags behind the mind's racing thoughts. MEG bridges the two, but at great expense and complexity. Yet it is in the weaving together of these imperfect threads that the richest tapestries emerge. Scientists now combine EEG and fMRI, overlaying the quicksilver flickers of electrical activity atop the slow, swelling waves of blood flow. They use machine learning to sift through the torrents of data, searching for patterns that might reveal the neural signatures of thought, emotion, or disease. With every advance, new questions arise. What is the meaning of these rhythms, these shifting constellations of activity? Can we read intention or even memory from the patterns we observe? What is lost in translation as we move from the living mind to its maps and graphs? Beyond the laboratory, brainwave monitoring has begun to seep into daily life. Portable EEG headbands promise to track our focus, our sleep, even our meditative states. Artists have composed music from their brainwaves. Patients with paralysis have used neural signals to move robotic arms. The boundary between observer and observed grows ever thinner. Yet, for all our progress, the brain retains its secrets. The waves we chart and the images we conjure are but shadows, hints cast by the firelight of consciousness. The tools we wield are lanterns, not floodlights. They reveal much, but leave much in darkness. Somewhere in the future, perhaps, more profound instruments will emerge, machines capable not only of mapping the mind's surface, but of plunging into its depths, of tracing the birth of a thought, the flicker of a dream, the weaving of memory and self. For now, we stand as cartographers on a dusky shore, drawing maps of a continent half veiled in mist. Each new technique carves a clearer outline, marks another hidden bay or mountain. The work is patient, the discoveries slow to yield. But with every experiment, every image, every squiggle of voltage, the unseen world within us becomes a little less opaque. In the hush that follows, as night deepens, the mind's own waves continue their secret passage. The EEG's silver wires lie quiet. The MRI's magnets rest in their silent rings. Yet behind closed eyelids, the brain's electric tides are unceasing, flowing through sleep and dream, traversing landscapes still only partly known. And so, as the tools of science grow ever more subtle and our maps more intricate, we are left poised at the threshold. The next step, perhaps, is not only to chart the waves, but to understand what stories they tell, how the rhythms of the brain compose the symphony of experience, and how, in the end, the unseen becomes seen. And so, under the hush of midnight and the gentle thrum of a world at rest, let us slip quietly into the most intimate chambers of the story of mind waves, their mysterious interplay with consciousness, and the profound, ever-elusive possibility that we might, in some way, steer or harmonize them. There is a peculiar hush that falls over the subject, a reverence that attends any discussion of the mind peering into itself. Here, science becomes almost philosophical, and the language of voltages and oscillations brushes up against poetry and paradox. Think for a moment of the brain not merely as a tangle of cells, but as a cathedral of subtle music. Beneath the cranium's protective arch, billions of neurons pulse in electrical symphony, their signals weaving together into the grand tapestry of thought and selfhood. These are the brain waves, those faint rhythmic undulations rippling through the neural seas, shaping every sensation, emotion, and dream. From the most primal throb of delta waves, the slow tide of deep, dreamless sleep, to the nimble flicker of gamma, the mind's frequencies span a spectrum as broad and mysterious as the visible colors of light. Each frequency, each rhythm, is more than mere measurement. It is a language, a code, an echo of the mind's inner workings. But what is it, truly, that we are hearing in these electrical murmurs? The EEG, our window into this activity, reveals little squiggles, a hint no more of the neuronal ballet within. When we speak of brain waves, we mean not actual waves of matter, but the orchestrated rise and fall of voltages, the sum of countless microscopic impulses. Yet, from these tiny transient electrical events emerges something astonishingly stable, the sense of a continuous self, a soul in motion, awake and aware. How is it that the simple oscillation of ions, the rhythmic dance of sodium and potassium across cellular membranes, can give rise to the shimmering phenomenon we call consciousness? It is a question that has haunted philosophers and scientists alike for centuries. The ancients, lacking the tools to peer inside the skull, spoke of the mind as a flame, a wind, or a spirit. Today, with the electrodes and algorithms of modern neuroscience, we have mapped the peaks and valleys of mental activity, traced the circuits of memory, emotion, and perception. Yet the core enigma remains: how does the mind arise from matter? How do these electrical rhythms become not just thought, but the very experience of being? Descartes, that brooding thinker of the 17th century, split the world in two: the realm of res extensa, the measurable world of matter, and res cogitans, the unmeasurable world of mind. For him, consciousness was a ghost in the machine, an immaterial essence forever separate from the body's mechanics. Many centuries later, as EEGs hummed and brain scans flickered, it became ever more apparent that the mind is not so neatly partitioned. The self emerges from the body, and the body, in turn, is shaped by the mind. The electrical storms of the cortex are not mere byproducts. They are the very stuff of our inner life. Yet, even as we trace the roots of awareness to the synchronized firing of cortical columns, something ineffable persists. The philosopher David Chalmers famously dubbed it the hard problem of consciousness. Why should the firing of neurons feel like anything at all? Why should there be not just processing of information, but subjectivity, an inner movie, a first-person world? Some have speculated that the answer lies in the harmonies of brainwaves themselves. Consider, for instance, the concept of binding, the unification of disparate sensory inputs into a single, seamless experience. When you gaze upon a scene, a city skyline at dusk, or the gentle sway of treetops in the breeze, your brain must knit together countless fragments: the color of the sky, the sharpness of a building's edge, the distant hum of traffic. Each detail is processed in a different corner of the cortex, yet your perception is not disjointed but whole. One hypothesis is that this unity is achieved through the synchronization of neural oscillations. Like musicians tuning to a common beat, neurons across the brain align their rhythms, binding together the threads of perception into a coherent tapestry. If this is so, then consciousness itself may be not a static thing, but a pattern of synchrony, a fleeting alignment of mind waves, ever shifting, never quite the same from one moment to the next. We are, perhaps, the music of our own minds, a harmony that emerges and dissolves with the changing tempo of our thoughts. And what of the possibility, the tantalizing possibility, that these rhythms might be tuned, shaped, or even consciously controlled? Here, science brushes against the borderlands of speculation and hope. For centuries, mystics and meditators have claimed the ability to alter their states of mind, to reach deep stillness or transcendent clarity through discipline and practice. In recent times, this ancient intuition has found resonance in the laboratory. Neurofeedback, that curious blend of technology and self-exploration, allows individuals to observe their own brainwaves in real time. Electrodes gently pressed to the scalp, a subject sits before a monitor, watching a visual representation of their mental rhythms, perhaps a moving bar, a shifting color, a rising tone. Through subtle shifts of attention, relaxation, or focus, they learn to nudge their own brain waves into new patterns. Children with ADHD, for example, have been taught to enhance their beta waves, those frequencies associated with alertness, while reducing the slower, more wandering theta. The effects, though sometimes modest, are real: improved concentration, a steadier mood, a clearer mind. But neurofeedback is only the beginning. In meditation halls and yoga studios around the world, practitioners have been shown to cultivate remarkable control over their own neural rhythms. Long-term meditators display heightened alpha and theta activity, markers of a tranquil yet attentive mind. Some Tibetan monks, trained in the rigors of focused awareness, can elicit powerful gamma synchrony, those fleeting, high-frequency bursts associated with insight, compassion, and unity. Their consciousness, it seems, is not passive, but sculpted, refined by years of inner discipline. What does it mean, then, to think of the mind as both observer and conductor of its own symphony? Are we, at some level, able to steer the very waves that give rise to selfhood? The answer, as always, is both yes and no. Our conscious will is but one current among many, shaped by genetics, expert, I-ents, and the ceaseless flow of the unconscious. Yet within the great river of mind, there are eddies, places where intention can redirect the flow, however subtly. Beyond the individual, a deeper, almost mystical question arises. Can minds connect, their waves aligning in a communion beyond words? The phenomenon of brain-to-brain synchrony has become a subject of fascination for neuroscientists. When two people engage in deep conversation, their brainwaves can become subtly entrained, pulses of neural activity rising and falling in tandem. In moments of shared attention, laughter, music, storytelling, a group's neural rhythms may, for a brief time, move as one. The boundaries between self and other grow porous. Empathy, understanding, and collective joy emerge from this invisible resonance. It is tempting to imagine that, in such moments, we touch something larger than ourselves, a field of mind, a shared consciousness flickering into being. While the science remains young and the mysteries manifold, these glimpses hint at the profound social nature of the human brain. We are not isolated islands, but archipelagos in a vast sea, our minds forever brushing against the minds of others. And so the philosophical implications unfold, vast and intricate as a mandala. If our consciousness is shaped by rhythms that can be tuned, that can harmonize with others, then the line between self and world, between inner and outer, grows less certain. The ancient question, what am I, is joined by new ones. Where do I end and you begin? Can we together create new states of mind, new forms of collective awareness? Such questions echo in the halls of science and spirit alike. In the laboratory, researchers probe the limits of brain-machine interfaces, seeking ways to translate neural oscillations into movement, speech, even thought. A paralyzed patient, by learning to modulate her own brainwaves, can move a robotic arm, type a word, or paint a picture. The boundaries between mind and machine, too, are blurring. A symphony not just of flesh, but of silicon and code. Yet with each new advance, the mystery deepens. For all our measurements and models, the subjective core of consciousness remains elusive, irreducible. The philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat? To see the world through echolocation, to inhabit a mind so alien from our own?" We might as well ask, what is it like to be another human with their own unique pattern of mind waves, their own shimmering field of awareness? No amount of data can fully bridge that gap. The mind, in the end, is both knowable and unknowable, a world unto itself, and yet forever reaching outward. There are those who dream of a future in which brainwaves can be tuned as easily as a radio, where mood disorders and suffering are soothed by gentle pulses of light or sound. Already, techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation and deep brain stimulation offer glimpses of this possibility, restoring balance to neural circuits disrupted by depression or epilepsy. Yet such power brings questions as well. What becomes of free will, of authenticity, when the rhythms of our minds can be shaped from without? Are we more ourselves or less when our thoughts are nudged by unseen hands? In the quiet of night, as the world drifts towards sleep and the mind's waves grow slow and deep, these questions linger. Perhaps in the end it is not answers we seek, but a deeper presence, a willingness to inhabit the mystery, to listen to the silent music within. The brain, with all its electrical poetry, is not a puzzle to be solved, but a companion to be cherished, a river to be navigated with care, wonder, and humility. Somewhere, out in the darkness, a child dreams, their brain waves undulating in patterns unique and unrepeatable. An old woman remembers, her neural rhythms echoing with decades of experience, loss, and love. In each of us, the symphony plays on, never quite the same, never fully understood. We are the music and the musicians, the listeners and the song. And as the night deepens and the world